1.
All right, let's take a moment to talk about the different framing members that we'll see as we begin to frame up our walls. You can look at our model here. Down here on the bottom, you'll have what's called either the bottom plate, or it's often referred to as the sole plate. And that will run throughout the length. After everything's framed up, we'll actually come in and cut out where the door openings are. But that's the bottom plate or sole plate. Up at the top, you always have a double top plate on your walls. And so typically we'll refer to this one as the top plate and the one on the very top as the double top plate. The main, most common member of our walls is called the stud. This is a single 2x4, 2x6, whatever our wall thickness is, framing member that will go from the bottom plate to the bottom of the top plate. And those will, depending on your wall sizes, you can actually order those to be pre-cut. For instance, if you're building a house with 8-foot walls, your pre-cut stud will always be 92 5/8. And so you could actually order 8-foot pre-cut studs, and that will make your installation and your build-up a lot easier. After the studs, next to that we have what's called a corner. Now a corner is basically 2 studs with blocks put in the middle just for spacing. And the reason that we do that is so that as the other wall comes in, there's plenty of material to nail the sheetrock to, go in both directions. And so it'll look more like this. As we fasten our stud on the wall coming into it, then still have nailing on both sides. And so that's why we have the spacer in between, so that we end up being 4.5 inches wide, which gives us enough room to nail our sheetrock on. So we come over here to the door. We'll notice we have 2 studs at every door. The outer stud, the one that's running from plate to plate, is called the king stud, and the inner stud is called the trimmer stud. The trimmer stud runs from the bottom plate up to the bottom of the header. This device going across the top here is called the header. Now that's going to support the load of the ceiling and the roof all the way up, and so there are certain span requirements on the headers. You always want to make sure you check your local and national codes before you build up your headers there as well. All right, a header is basically, depending on the material you're using, whether it be a 2x10 or 2x12 or even a 2x8, it would be 2 2x12s and then a 1/2 inch spacer in the middle. And what that does is it builds you up to an overall thickness of 3.5 inches, which is what our wall thickness is. So you have an 1.5 inch 2x12 here, a 1/2 inch spacer in the middle, and an 1.5 inch 2x12 here. All right, another framing member that we have that don't show here in our model is called a partition tee. Now, a partition tee is very similar to a corner. It's got 2 studs separated by blocks. The blocks in this case are turned flat, and the reason for that is we can turn our model up here. Partition tee would be in a wall coming this way, and it would allow our other wall to be fastened in this way. And so that's what those blocks are for. We can fasten in through one way, or if we've got a single stud here, we could fasten in the other way. And then that also allows us room to nail our sheetrock or whatever wall covering that we have on the inside on both walls. And so that's a partition tee. Another framing element that you may find in many city codes is called fire blocking. Now, fire blocking is typically will be a 2x4 mounted flat in between each stud, about midway up the wall. Many cities require that in walls over 8 foot tall, but some of them require it in all walls. And so basically that just creates a fire stop. Should a fire occur down low, keeps it from traveling up the wall and into the ceiling. Another aspect of blocking you may find would be a 2x4 mounted in between the studs with the flat part facing the wall for blocking for cabinets or maybe toilet handrails or anything like that, just to provide extra support and material inside the wall to fasten our equipment to. All right, let's discuss the difference between a window and a door framing that you might see in either an exterior or an interior wall. It's almost basically the same type framing. We have the header going across the top. We have the king stud on the outside, and we have the trimmer stud on the inside, here and here. Those two are basically the exact same opening. The main difference that we'll see in framing a door versus a window is that door framing will be 2.5 inches wider than the dimension of the door that you're going to install. So for instance, if we're installing a 3.0 or a 36-inch door, our framing will actually be 38.5 inches wide. And so our header would actually build up to be 41.5 inches because it sets over on top of the trimmer studs. Windows are slightly different. Windows are actually framed to be exactly what the call size of the window is. And so if it's a 3.0 or a 36-inch window, it'll actually be 36 inches wide. It's built into the window to allow for the distance around there. This would represent a 3.050, which would be 3 foot wide by 5 foot tall window. And so our opening would actually be 3 foot by 5 foot. Just a note about the headers. Again, we want to make sure that we always check our codes and our span charts to make sure that we've got sufficient header to carry the load. Now remember, if we're building a header on an exterior wall, it's going to be carrying a lot more weight than if we're building a header on, say, an interior wall. However, a good rule of thumb and just a good practice is go ahead and make all your headers the same. You never know when you might have the opportunity to brace down from the roof that might end up close to something like that. And so if we build all our headers the same, whether they're interior or exterior, then basically we've got everything covered. All right, let's go back to our window. And the other difference that you'll see is this area down here on window framing. For a window, we have what's called a seal. This is a rough seal right here. Sometimes you may see a double seal, double or single, depending on the size of the window, will be sufficient. And the studs that are underneath are called cripple studs. They're cut shorter to come up directly under the rough seal, and they are also will be on 16-inch centers in relation to our wall. And so you may find your cripple studs to be kind of strange looking here, but they're on 16-inch centers in relation to the wall. That way, as we're fastening our sheet material, our sheetrock, or whatever it would be on the inside of the wall, that we're still able to hit on those joints. Studs are the most common framing member in a wall. Studs can be purchased in full-length measurements by 2-foot increments, or they can be purchased in pre-cut lengths. Lumber mills produce pre-cut studs for common wall heights. For example, a pre-cut stud for an 8-foot wall height is 92 5/8 of an inch long. This allows for a single sole plate and a double top plate, creating a wall that builds up to approximately 8 foot 1 inch. This allows for drywall on the ceiling and for floor covering. Corners are constructed using 2 pre-cut studs separated by 3 to 4 shorter blocks. This creates a member which is 3.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Once installed, the member will provide a means of tying the corner together, as well as providing a surface to install the drywall on the inside. T's are similar to corners, with the exception that the blocks separating the studs are turned flat to provide nailing to an incoming partition. Trimmer studs are support members installed under the door or window header. Trimmer studs are cut to length to support the header material at the right height. Once cut, the trimmer stud is fastened to a pre-cut stud. Headers are constructed by fastening 2 header material pieces together, in this case 2x12s, separated by a 1/2 inch material. The header will be 3.5 inches thick. The header material should be cut 3 inches longer than the rough opening of the framing. Rough openings for windows are typically the call size of the window. Rough openings for doors are typically 2.5 inches wider than the call size of the door. For instance, a 3.0 door will require a rough opening of 38.5 inches. A 2.8 window will require a rough opening of 2 foot 8 inches.